Okay, then it's 2:45. Let's get started with this Russell Group presentation by my colleague Adam Al-janabi. He's going to take you through the supercurricular detail as he's got on the front of his presentation slides. So let's just get things going. It'll take about 30 minutes, I believe, for us to go through this. Adam's going to take you all through it, and we'll have maybe a bit of a Q&A at the end, which I'll come and join in again. So I'm going to pass over to my wonderful colleague now so that he can take you through the presentation. Adam, over to you, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing all right. Probably been quite a long day, so just bear with me. We'll get through it. So I'm here to talk to you today about Russell Group supercurricular, and I'm also going to talk about some extracurricular stuff as well for getting into Oxbridge and other Russell Group universities. Before I talk, I recognize some of my students in the call, but most of you probably don't know who I am, so I'm just going to introduce me. That's me there in Sicily. I have a BSc and an MChem from the University of York, so that was a Russell Group university. I also have a PGCE from the University of Cambridge, and I'm currently doing a master's at the University of Cambridge, as well as teaching at Long Road Sixth Form at the same time. My favourite parts of university were absolutely extracurricular activities, which is why I'm going to spend a lot of time today going over that as well, because I think it is ultimately, I guess, not as important as the academic stuff, but it is a lot more important than people let on. So we're going to start off by talking about what supercurricular activities are and why they're important for your application. We're then going to move into extracurricular activities, and then we're going to look at some examples of some personal statements, and you're going to see what you do and what you don't like about them based on super and extracurricular activities. So supercurricular means content that's beyond your specification, okay? It's proving that you have an interest in the subject. To do this, you need to find things that inspire you. It shouldn't be a case of you're like, oh, I'm making an application to university, therefore I need to read some books that will show that I'm smart or that I know these things. It's more about you finding out what you like about the subject. If you do literature and you're very much into, let's say, Edgar Allan Poe, and you want to read more of his work, read more of his work. Read the things that inspire you. If you're doing chemistry and you're really into metal complexes for the treatment of cancer, look into that. Don't look for supercurricular stuff that bores you or stuff that you think that the university might be impressed by. At the end of the day, you're trying to show the university that you have a passion for a subject and that you deserve to study it further. So it should never feel like a chore. This is a direct piece of advice from the University of Cambridge. You shouldn't read for the sake of it. You should pick some topics you find interesting and delve further into them. If you ever find yourself bored by extra reading, then stop, because at that point, are you reading it just so that you can say that you've read a certain book, or are you actually interested in the topic or the actual subject as a whole? It's important that you choose the right subject, and you should always enjoy the supercurricular engagement to some extent. Remember, at university, especially if you're going down, well, any Russell Group path, you're going to be doing a lot of potential research, delving into future areas of that subject. If you're not genuinely interested in that subject, then you're going to struggle. And the university wants to know that. They want to know that you are as interested in the subject as you need to be to succeed on that course. They're not setting these entry requirements to hurt you, and they're not setting these entry requirements to stop you from getting in. They want to make sure that you make the right choice. And supercurricular activities will allow you to decide if you are making the right choice. Maybe you can't decide yet between, ooh, I really like medicinal physics, but I also like biological anthropology, and I want to study the ancient physics which relates to ancient civilizations. Okay, well, have a little bit of a read about both subjects. Find which one genuinely makes you interested, because that's the degree you're going to enjoy, and that's the one you're going to succeed in more. When you're writing about the supercurricular reading, which you probably haven't done much of yet, maybe you've done a little bit, maybe you haven't done very much. The university wants to see what that research, what that reading means to you. You want to explain why you love a subject, and the supercurricular reading should help you to explain why. It's better to write in your personal statement about one book that you loved and the influence that it had on you, as opposed to writing about 10 books which you don't have enough room to write about properly. I'd like you to consider these two examples, both of which are from personal statements submitted to the University of Cambridge. So I'd just like you to read them on your own, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these two statements. It explicitly says that the top one is bad and the bottom one is good. This is in a Cambridge Guide to Supercurricular Reading that I will send you after this seminar. The reason this top one is bad is it's not really saying what influence any of these texts had on the writer. They just said they read about multiculturalism, and you also read about ethnic minorities, and I found that interesting. I mean, wonderful. Anything can be interesting. That says absolutely nothing about you and why you want to study this. You're just saying that you've read about it. You haven't done anything. And a lot of students will write a personal statement like this, and they'll think that it's good because it's showing off, look how much I've read. Look how many of these different jargon words that I'm using. Well, you haven't explained your interest in the subject. The bottom one, which is very waffly, this goes into great detail about what this article meant for them. They took one particular argument from the article, in that the concept is deeply rooted in classical liberalism ideologies, and they intersected that and what it meant for them, and ways that it made them reconsider their subject. They've talked about one thing in one big paragraph, and this big paragraph says a lot more to the university than that top one. So the thing I'm trying to get across here is that it's not super important to read a lot of texts. I actually had one of my students ask me today. They were like, "Oh, I've worked with 8 different companies, and I've done a bunch of different readings. Do I need to do any more?" Probably not. I mean, you really only need to read a little bit as long as you actually delve into it. If you are finding things interesting and you're genuinely interested in your subject, you will probably end up reading some stuff on your own without even meaning to, because you're interested in it. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Something will have made you love your subject, and that's what the university wants to hear about, and that's what you should be reading in your supercurricular. So when we're talking about the arts and the humanities, for anyone in this call that wants to apply to a Russell Group University for arts and humanities, it is important to write about books that you've read and why you enjoyed them, much like these two examples here. You want to have 1 or 2 pieces of reading in your personal statement, explaining in depth what they mean to you and your appreciation of the subject. When it comes to the sciences, this is less important. Reading is much less important. There are less applicants to your course. For most sciences, they're mostly looking for you to have a solid understanding of maths and problem solving, more than they are looking for you to push the limits of the subject. Ultimately, with the sciences, the majority of extra reading is completely inaccessible to you at your level. You will not understand any papers about cisplatins activation of C14 ligands in cancer cells. That will mean nothing to you. It will once you've done the degree, and you might want to explain why you want to learn about these things, but the external reading is not as important as it is having an absolutely solid understanding of maths and problem solving, which will be incredibly important if you get to an interview stage at Oxford or Imperial or any of these other very high Russell Group universities. This is a statement from Cambridge about science applications, which I'd like you to have a little read now. So this talks about a different aspect of supercurricular, which is something you might not have thought about as much. We've talked about extra reading and delving into your subject matter. For the arts and the humanities, this is incredibly important. Finding some books and areas of the subject that you're interested in and reading up on it. This also applies to the arts and humanities, but is especially important for science is the other aspect of supercurricular, that is experiences in other areas. For example, this statement says to enter some science Olympiads. I know that there's a chemistry Olympiad that you can enter. It's a very, very, very difficult problem-solving paper that you can enter to compare yourself against other top people in chemistry. They do these science Olympiads for different science courses. Regardless of how you do in these Olympiads, it's an experience that you can write about. Just entering an Olympiad proves that you really want to do that subject, and that even if you aren't up to scratch yet, you might be in the future because you're willing to put in that work. And ultimately, that's what they're looking for. Work experience is incredibly useful as well for any science-based subjects in terms of supercurricular. And there are lots of places you can apply to look around a lab, help out with things. Even just talking about a museum visit that you went to that inspired you is more than enough to impress anyone at a university. You're just trying to say, look, I like the subject and I'm genuinely keen to learn more about it. Here's why I'm interested in it. Whether you do that through books, as is important in the arts and humanities, or whether you do it through experiences, as is important through the sciences, both of those things will help and strengthen your application and your desire to study that further. Now, obviously, this is all high and grandiose, saying, "Oh yeah, you should get a part-time thing working at a hospital to see what it's like." That's a difficult thing to get, especially during COVID. A lot of these experiences are kind of out of reach at the moment, being in lockdown. That is not something to worry about because they're out of reach for everybody. So it's not a case of you're competing any harder against anyone else. Everyone else is in the same boat. And so doing a little bit of extra reading, watching a documentary, perhaps even just being interested in some science around you should be enough, as long as you're showing more than your curriculum's interest in the subject, more than just your specification. The next thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about this fairly briefly before we look through some personal statements, is extracurricular activities, which are just as important as supercurricular. Now, about me, like my only hobby up until sixth form was gaming. That's all I did. I remember I remember being a bit of a loser when I was about 16, and I was looking out the window and I saw a bunch of friends from my year walk past having fun, and I was just inside playing on Animal Crossing. And I decided I was probably going to try and change the way that I was living. So I started a bunch of new hobbies. One thing that really kicked that into gear for me was my personal statement, which you guys probably aren't writing just yet. But when you're writing your personal statement and you're trying to write about yourself, I realized that I didn't have very much to write about. I wasn't a very interesting person. I was just going through the motions, doing my subjects, and then going home, playing games, watching Netflix. I wasn't doing anything that was particularly interesting, and that made it very hard to write a personal statement. I do loads of things now. I play guitar, piano, stand-up, acting, drawing, painting, rock climbing, and gymming on pretty much a weekly basis. I do all of these things at least once or more times a week. And I've only started this stuff pretty much late sixth form, just before entering year 13. So it's stuff that you can start. And starting this stuff has a huge range of benefits, not only for your university application, but for your academic life as a whole, which is what I'm going to go through now. So studies have shown that extracurricular activities can actually improve your academic performance. The reason is they provide a way to relax after a hard day whilst also providing long-term goals outside of education. If your only goal at the moment is to get, let's say, an A in your favorite subject, and then to get into university, that's a good goal to have, but it means that all your goals are localized in one place. You're never going to get a break from school properly because you're always going to be stressing about that. Having some goals outside of education can allow you to feel accomplished for doing things that aren't necessarily work-based, which allows it makes it less stressful to then do work later on. So let's say you've always wanted to learn to play guitar. Now would be a great time to pick that up. As you get slightly better at guitar because you're doing it in your spare time, you have this immense release of serotonin, which calms you down and allows you to work harder in education as well. These two things work together really well. A lot of people seem to think if you're good at something like science, that you shouldn't therefore be good at acting, because they're two different fields. But they don't really affect one another. In fact, being good at one thing can help you to be good at something else. Just because they don't have any transferable skills directly doesn't mean that being happy for accomplishing one thing won't make you happier to try harder in something else. Now, they make you a much more interesting and rounded person, which is very important for university applications. You can write about something called transferable skills. So one thing that I wrote about in my personal statement for university is I wrote about rock climbing. I got onto a rock climbing team, and I wrote about problem solving. When you're rock climbing, you have to do a lot of problem solving on the fly. This is the same with a lot of different sports. I wrote about this, and they were really interested in that in my interview at York, because it was different. Most people were just writing about chemistry, but I was writing about how my subjects were going to help me. How my hobbies were going to help me in my subjects. They found that very interesting, and it genuinely is true. Like, you have this lateral thinking. The more you're problem solving in different areas, the easier it's going to be academically. It's also good from a job perspective. I've had many opportunities since starting further education. I've published 3 papers with a University of York scholarship. It's very competitive. I had my first published scientific paper at age 20, which is very young. And the reason I got through that interview and all these other subsequent interviews was one thing. One thing on my statement pushed me above every other candidate. It wasn't getting good grades. It wasn't having good science experience. The one thing that made me stand out each time was my hobby of stand-up. Each time I talk about stand-up in an interview, they were really interested in it. It made me stand out compared to all the other candidates. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop charger. And immediately help them to remember me. These hobbies can really, really, really help you when you're trying to get into university or jobs in the future, as well as just making you enjoy stuff more on a daily basis. So there's no reason not to do them. Now, I was going to set a breakout rooms activity now to compare some personal statements, but I've forgotten to update Teams on my laptop, so I can't do that. Instead, I'm going to share 6 personal statements in the chat. So if you click the conversation button in the middle of your page, I'm going to share 6 personal statements in the chat, and I'd like you to spend about 10 minutes just looking through some of them and deciding what you do and don't like about them. So they should be in the chat now. I don't mind which ones you look at, and ignore the bit that says group. Obviously, that's because I was going to group you into breakout rooms, but I can't do that anymore. So just feel free to read whichever ones you want and have a think about them. Think about what makes it good, and think about what makes it boring as well. Would you want to meet the person? If you're reading this personal statement, would you want to meet them? Because ultimately, you're trying to convince your university that they want to meet you, that they want to have you in their course. And if you seem really boring, then they might not want you. And do you think they could bring something interesting to the table? Is this person in this statement going to do something new for the subject? Are they passionate about it? Or are they just another run-off-the-mill student, doesn't really know what they wanted to do at university, so they've just chose the subject that they're best at?
Adam, for some reason I can't see it.
In the chat?
Yeah.
Oh, it says they're still sending, that's why. Hang on, I'll send them one by one. Tim, do we have a group for this, or is it just a meeting?
You'll have to explain out what that means to me. I'm sorry, Adam. What do you
Okay,
mean by
I'll just upload them one by one.
Okay, I mean, I can run down and get ITS if that helps, and then
No, that's not the problem.
Okay.
There we go. They've all sent.
I can see them now, so it's fine.
There we go. Okay, fantastic.
Okay, so does anyone want to be quite bold and put in the chat, or just by speaking if you're confident enough, any ways in that you think those personal statements are good and or bad? We're specifically looking at super and extracurricular stuff at the moment.
The first one's not great because it only talks about the subjects they're taking, not about anything they do in their spare time, I don't think.
Yes, that one's good. That's the picture, group 1, statement 1, yeah? The engineering personal statement.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
Awesome. Yes, I picked that one specifically for that. The only thing they've written about that's slightly extracurricular, supercurricular, is that they take part in ECDL course on Microsoft Office to enhance their computing skills. That's not very much, but at least they've put something in there that's supercurricular. But you're right. For the most part, everything they've done here is something that the majority of students applying to this engineering course will also have done by default. So nothing they've done has really shown that they are going to make an amazing engineer and that they should be chosen over anyone else, because they've just done the bare minimum. They haven't done anything above that. So yeah, that's good. Anyone else want to have a go?
I think the group 2 statement 1, it mentions a lot of like names of things that they've, not how they affected them or why they liked them. And it said something about winning a lot of poetry competitions, but like it didn't have any like names of ones or anything like that. Yeah,
good. Very good. Group 2 statement 1 is probably the worst personal statement I've ever read. It's not great.
I love the detail of all the poetry. It's like, when I'm not doing poetry, I like to hang out with my mates.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great. Is this the one that says only the weak-minded refuse to be influenced by literature and poetry?
Yeah, it's that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in there. I mean, she has included a bunch of things that she's read, to be fair, but she hasn't said how any of them impacted her. She just says she loves novels, such as Pride and Prejudice, and Lord of the Rings, which isn't a novel, it's an omnibus, so that's a massive negative. They said she enjoys history, especially the Edwardians, as I'm a big fan of Downton Abbey. That's a poor example of explaining why you're into history, but also you're not applying for a history course. So this isn't super curricular. It has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's not. You could probably reference it as an extracurricular thing later on if you're like, I'm really keen and interested in learning about lots of things, maybe even about literature in the Edwardian era would be a way to bring that in. But the way that they've done it, they've just written about another subject in the middle for absolutely no reason. Things like this sentence here, like, I'm the best in my class for all my subjects, so I think I'd fit right in at Oxford. This is abysmal because you haven't said why you're the best in all your subjects. You've just made a statement. Everything you say in your personal statement should be backed up with something else. Tim, do you want to say something?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, Adam, actually. And remember that we do references as well. So actually, that's the sort of stuff that your teachers and your progress coach will put in a reference in a better format than that. So excellent point, Adam, to bring up there, if that's okay. And I've noticed in the chat room, Adam, as well, one of our other students has said that the dentistry one was good at applying their hobbies to the course that they wanted to apply to. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, thanks, Tim. I was going to move on to that as soon as I'd done this. So yes, well done. I think group 2 statement 1 is the weakest of all of them. So the dentistry one was good at applying their hobbies to the course that they wanted to apply to. Yes, I'm presuming you mean group 3 statement 1, inspired by their aunt, who is a dentist. They have a huge section about working at 3 different dental practices, which is really, really good. So that's super curricular stuff that they're doing, which is going to put them above lots of other candidates. It's proving that they're interested in the subject, not only to the university, but to themselves. If you've worked at 3 different dental practices and you still want to be a dentist, you probably actually want to be a dentist. If you've worked at 3 different dental practices and you've hated it, you probably don't want to be a dentist. So that's good. It's proved to themselves and to the university. In terms of extracurricular stuff, they've talked about working at voluntary organizations, and they've done that really well because they've talked about how dentists need to be compassionate, and then they've shown that they're compassionate by saying that they volunteer at charity organizations. wonderful. If you make any statement about yourself like I'm compassionate or I'm devoted or I'm very resilient, you have to back it up with something to prove that. So say like I'm resilient as proved by this experience I had when I was trying to raise money for charity. So I did a sponsored bag pack and it was very difficult, but I managed to get through it in the end and raise X amount of money for charity. There you go. You've proved that you're resilient and you're compassionate with one experience. And that's proving to the university that you are those things. If you're just saying, I'm confident, that means nothing. They also talk about extracurricular activities such as Junior Sports Leader Award in recognition of being a sportswoman and playing netball, basketball, badminton, and tennis. Written and enjoy writing song lyrics. This is an incredible personal statement. Very impressive. So yeah, group 3, statement 1, very good. Definitely one to look at when you're trying to write your own personal statement in the future. Daisy, thank you. Group 2, statement 2 is very over-exaggerated and is just a list of skills with no application. Yeah, weirdly enough, group 2, statement 2 I threw in as kind of like a wild card. This is the one that says, I'm a dynamic figure, often seen scaling walls and crushing ice. I've been known to remodel train stations on my lunch breaks, making them more efficient in the areas of heat retention. I translate ethnic slurs for Cuban refugees. I write award-winning operas. I manage time efficiently. This person actually got into the University of New York with this personal statement. I found it quite interesting. I absolutely highly doubt that that would ever work again. I think it just took them so much by surprise, and the person that sent this in had such good grades that they just wanted to see them, took them in for an interview, and actually liked them. So they probably took a bit of a flip on that one. But I think that one's interesting, and that the University of New York actually went with this, which is, it's just a bunch of dribble. But it is saying a lot about the person that wrote it. In all of this complete and utter nonsense that they've written, the university is saying that they've got a good sense of humor, and they've already proven themselves with their references and the grades that they've put in. So the university was willing to make a stab at it. I absolutely do not recommend following that, but I thought it's quite an interesting example. Cool. I'm quite happy with what we've discussed. I'm quite happy to open up to questions now if anyone has any questions. There's just one last thing I want to cover on my PowerPoint. So we talked about what we think. I want to talk about extracurricular from a university perspective. Russell Group universities all have very similar entry requirements, often AAB or higher. Every student applying to that university will have been predicted at least these grades. So the grades are not enough. Let's say you're applying to the University of Manchester. There might be, I think there's around about 150 places for a course in chemistry at the University of Manchester, but they're going to be getting applications from all around the country with people who have a minimum expected grades of A, and B. That means they're going to have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 odd applications. A lot of people are applying for that place. Just having the grades is not going to make you stand out. You want to have something that makes them think, yeah, we want this person. We don't want them to go to any other university. We want them to go here. And extra and supercurricular are absolutely the way to do that. Your grades are great. Your grades are what are going to help you get in, but they're not going to help you stand out. Supercurricular and extracurricular is the way to go. Today is the day to start picking up a new hobby. I know there isn't that much that you can do because we're in a lockdown, but if you want to start running, you want to play piano because you've always wanted to play piano, or maybe you want to carry on with something that you did as a kid that you've given up on, or even just carry on with something that you're still doing. That's all good. Keep that going or start it. Now is the time, because it'll make it so much easier when you come to write your statement. And in terms of supercurricular, really have a think about what it is that interests you in your subject. If you are interested in, let's say, history, which specific area of history are you interested in? What made you interested in that specific area of history? What do you want to find out? Go and find it out. Don't wait for your teacher to tell you. Go and find it out yourself. Be a researcher. Be interested in your subject. And if you are, it will come across in your personal statement, and it'll come across in your interview, and you will absolutely get into these universities, and you will absolutely make a difference when you enter the working world. This is a bunch of bullet points on what to do with your actual statement. I realize that the writing of your personal statement is quite a while away, so this probably isn't something to think about just yet. It might be worth print screening, but I am going to send you a link to a document from the University of Cambridge on supercurricular stuff, which I think you'll find quite useful. But yes, like I said, any questions from anyone, feel free to post them in the chat if you're embarrassed about speaking.
Excellent stuff, Adam. Thank you very much for that so far. If there are any questions, do put them in the chat room or shout through while I just sort of talk over people here. But I just want to thank you, Adam, for that. I've learned a lot about supercurricular and extracurricular activities. Even though I've gone through this over a number of years, I always learn something new, and I thought that was really interesting because sometimes I get the general sort of supercurricular sort of messages coming across. This was much more specific and individual and personalized, and I think that's been really helpful from my side. So I want to thank you personally for that. I can see there's a couple of questions coming through there. Shall I read them out?
I can see them, Tim. Thank you for that.
Right, okay, go for it.
Thank you for that. So we've got from Pierre, did you do any work experience during sixth form? So I did do when was it? So between year 12 and year 13, I did a trip to Ghana, the classic, I mean, I went to a very poor school, but it's the classic rich school move. I raised a lot of money to do that. That was my main thing that I spoke about in my personal statement, was doing that experience. So I raised a lot of money by getting in touch with Domino's Pizza, and I was like, can I have some free pizzas? And then all the money goes to charity. And turns out Domino's Pizza do one charity event a year across the entire country, and they decided to go with me because I don't know why, to be honest, but they did. So I managed to get a lot of money out of that. And I talked about that in my personal statement, and I adapted that into supercurricular because I was like, look, I'm really devoted in chemistry. Look how devoted I was here. I want to make a difference in the world. Here is me proving that I want to make a difference in the world through a different aspect. I did also help out teaching chemistry to a bunch of different schools. I did entomology, which is the study of insects, with a bunch of different schools in the Newcastle area. I did that for a few weeks, and I talked about that as well. I think that that was quite helpful, but I'm aware that doing work experience at the moment is probably quite difficult. It's probably easier. I know that they've set up, in fact, I'm pretty sure you set this up. There's like a reading group for reading chemistry in the college that was going to be set up. Stuff like that counts. That's supercurricular. If you set up a reading group or you go to an after-school science club, that's still more than other people. Like you're still doing something that's supercurricular. It doesn't necessarily have to be work experience.
I think that's a good point. And one of our students last year, Adam, who's gone on to read psychology at university this year, she decided she was so much into sort of trying to help people overcome the stress of the exams or potential exams last year that she actually wrote a paper on how to sort of calm yourself down. It was all to do with mindfulness and that, but that was a student of ours who did just one side of A4, so it was a nice small bit, easy read, and actually sort of gave it out to the college, to students as well. They're the nice sort of little touches that I think sometimes you can do as a little bit of extracurricular stuff that if you think is helpful and important to others, put it out there. So I think that's a good one.
That's awesome. Thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, I mean, that would look amazing on a personal statement, and it's also helping all your friends as well. So that's a double good thing to do. Anyone else got any questions?
I think that's about time then, isn't it? We've got lots of students that have stayed to the end, and I know they've enjoyed it just like I have. So we've got about 45 minutes up now, and I'd like to try and finish it if I could at that point, simply because we're hoping to put these little things on YouTube, and we need to sort of keep them to a sort of limit. So may I thank Adam for his contribution today, and all the students for also being with us and taking part as well. And I'm sure, Adam, if there's any questions that are coming up at a later date and I get some through email, I'll forward them on to you, and if you could sort of drop a reply to them.
Sounds good.
Okay, fantastic. Let's all finish now. Thank you so much, students. You're doing really great, and thank you for turning up. And Adam, I'll catch you in person hopefully sometime soon in college.
Awesome. Catch you later, Tim. Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
thank you, everyone.
Good
Cheers
luck with
now.
everything.
Bye-bye.